In a lengthy thread this week, the Commissioner of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, Dr. Bob Califf, has this to say: I believe that misinformation is now our leading cause of death, and we must do something about it. The leading cause of death is misinformation, according to the FDA commissioner. Is that possibly true? Could that possibly be true? Well, the first thing I did when I heard such a statistic was I spit out my coffee, because I thought to myself, what are you talking about? The number one cause of death, according to the US CDC's 2020 statistics, is heart disease at 696,000 deaths in the United States. Number two, cancer, 602,000. Number three was COVID-19 at 350,000. And the statistics for 2021 provisionally look quite similar. Number four was accidents and injuries at 200,000. Number five was stroke at 160,000. How do you get misinformation as number one? It's got to somehow elbow out cancer and heart disease. Even if you were to claim, which I think would be wrong, that every single person who passed away from COVID passed away because of misinformation. I think that has to be wrong, because many people unfortunately got COVID despite taking all necessary precautions and doing everything that they quote unquote should have done, particularly in 2020. But even if you believe that every single death was attributable to misinformation, you're still not number one. You're still not passing heart disease and cancer. I don't know how you're going to claim this. There's another part to it. He was later interviewed by CNN, and this is the quote. Dr. Califf, when asked about the fact he said this, he said, I have to acknowledge there's no way to quantify this. What are you talking about? No way to quantify it. It is a claim about a numerical value. What's number one? What is the number one cause of death in this country? You're saying it's misinformation. There's heart disease, there's cancer, there's COVID, there's other causes. I don't know how you're going to claim misinformation is somehow one unless you somehow attribute the majority of the deaths with all those different conditions to misinformation. And I don't think we can attribute it that way, because I don't think heart disease is the root cause is misinformation, and I don't think the root cause of cancer is misinformation. I'm not sure what people aren't doing or could be doing to avoid cancer. It's largely the randomness of life, some environmental carcinogens, but largely the randomness of life. And frankly, it just can't possibly be misinformation. Ironically, the claim by the FDA commissioner that misinformation is the number one cause of death is itself incorrect information, or what some might call misinformation. So it's got a great irony that misinformation is the number one cause of death. What's going on here? I keep seeing this. This administration, the Surgeon General, has this big packet on misinformation, and it's got a lot of things in that packet except the coherent definition of what is and is not misinformation, because it's a very difficult concept what misinformation is. It's like much of information, it's in the eye of the beholder. There are things that are universally agreed to be true, and there are things that we can all agree are totally false or spurious. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in between, from true things that are presented in a selective or misleading way, to things that are less true, to interpretations that are debatable, to things that are incorrect, to delusions, to fantasies. There's a huge spectrum of things. And who gets to decide where the line is drawn between truth and fiction? That's a tremendous power you're bestowing. And I keep seeing this administration calling for companies to quote-unquote police misinformation, but of course they mean information that they think is misinformation. This is a claim, a very clear claim, that misinformation is the leading cause of death by a senior official, the FDA commissioner. It cannot possibly be supported. He himself says it's not quantifiable, which is an oxymoron, because you're talking about something that is fundamentally quantifiable, how many people died of something. So the fact he's even saying this, I think, is totally wrong, incorrect. It's nonsensical. And I don't know why he's doubling down on it. And I think it is because he wants to police misinformation. I took a deeper look into this, and I thought to myself, that we're in a really interesting moment where there are many things people say that are incorrect, aren't supported by the evidence, don't have robust evidence, but they go with the prevailing narrative, and ergo, no one dares call that misinformation. They just say, he did it wrong, or it was a noble lie. What is a noble lie but misinformation? There are things on the other side that are inconvenient truths. One was myocarditis. We couldn't talk about that for a while. One is the possibility of lab leak. We couldn't talk about that for a while. I don't know if it's a true thing or not. I think it's a very difficult claim to kind of evaluate. Recently, I saw the New York Health Commissioner say something like, it's unfortunate that very young children sometimes get severe disease from COVID-19. That's true. It's very, very, very rare. Rarer than getting severe disease from other sorts of things that they've had to deal with in the past. It's a very rare event, but it is unfortunate. We'll all agree it is unfortunate that that happens. Ergo, you ought to get those very young kids vaccinated. But the problem with that claim is it assumes that we have robust evidence that vaccination would further reduce that very, very low risk. And the truth is we don't have that robust evidence. So some might say that's a type of misinformation. And then somebody wrote back to me and they said, well, we actually know it doesn't work. And I was like, actually, that's also misinformation because we don't know it doesn't either. We're in this nebulous situation where we neither have evidence proving that it does further reduce severe disease in young children, nor do we have evidence showing that it doesn't, because to have evidence either way, you'd have to run a mega randomized controlled trial, which we didn't do. But to me, that's the greater failure, is that we didn't do that kind of study. So, it's very difficult to parse these things. And I certainly don't think, government regulators can. And I think it's just really funny and ironic that the person who's saying this is a big problem is providing pretty much a totally bullshit statistic, because it cannot possibly be the case that it is the number one cause of death. I don't know why he had to say it. And I don't know why he didn't just back down from the statement. You know what? I was exaggerating. Ironically, in the heat of the moment, I said something wrong. Let's not call it misinformation. But I was trying to police the misinformation out there. We all do agree there are things we always hear that are problematic and poisonous and incorrect. But I truly do not think that is the root cause of sort of distrust in science or biomedicine. The root cause of distrust in these institutions is one, worsening wealth inequality, which I think makes people distrustful of systems that they believe perpetuate that. Two, the feeling that many elites are condescending and also tribal and linked to political party. I think that also is off-putting to many people. And three, the fact that institutions got many things wrong, that they misled or incorrect or continue to promulgate clearly erroneous statistics in pursuit of their agenda. And when you see people like the two top officials at FDA resign over this vaccine debate about boosters, of course that will sap institutional trust. But it's very hard to admit that you did something wrong, and it's much easier to point to the boogeyman of misinformation, and then to go even beyond that and claim that misinformation is the greatest cause of death in this country. Somehow pushing atherosclerosis has been there for a long time, but it just got in front of it and pushed it out of the way, number one. It's just not possible, and it's just not helpful. It's not helpful. It's not taking ownership of the failures, the things you did in the administration that were failures. I think the biggest failure is that you just kept launching policies without generating robust evidence. This whole airplane mask fiasco, they could have randomized 100 planes in a single day and answered the question, and then we wouldn't have to, speculate. This whole masking toddlers, we could have done a cluster randomized trial. We would have settled that. This whole boosting adolescents, we could have settled that. A huge randomized trial powered for severe disease hospitalization, enough power to detect myocarditis. We could have answered these questions. They didn't do the studies. And so when you have an evidence vacuum, politics and opinions fill a evidence vacuum. When you have robust evidence, nobody argues. I've not heard anyone argue since the summer of 2020 that dexamethasone doesn't have a role in COVID-19. They proved it in a randomized trial. We all agree. But I've heard people argue incessantly about the things with the lowest evidence. And it's always been that way in biomedicine. The things you talk about on rounds the most are the things with the weakest evidence, ironically. So, Bob Califf, the man who says that the administration for which he works should police misinformation, is claiming that it is the number one cause of death. That it has somehow surpassed both heart disease, with like 690,000 deaths, and cancer, 600,000 deaths. And even if you attributed every single COVID case and COVID death to misinformation, you still aren't there. You still have to somehow point a link that misinformation is the lion's share of cancer and heart disease. I don't know how you're going to try to do this. You can walk it back and say it's not a quantifiable claim, but it is inherently quantifiable because you're ranking something with a number. So you are totally guilty of misinformation. Your tweet about misinformation is misinformation, and it's proof that you are incompetent and cannot police misinformation. Misinformation cannot be policed by governments, can't be policed by anybody, because it's too complicated. Life is often gray, and science is often gray, particularly fields in their early in their evolution, where it's a hot topic, it's recently debated. You can't go from a brand new pathogen to indisputable facts in 1 year, 2 years. It takes maybe 40 years before there's some things that everyone can agree upon with 100%. It takes a long time, and you need to have a robust dialogue in the meantime. And so it's not helpful to falsely claim that misinformation is this big problem. It's much more helpful to look in the mirror and ask yourself, what are the things we're getting wrong using the bully pulpit of the White House and the full throat and force of government? And there are many things you've gotten wrong, so I would look in the mirror. So those are my thoughts on this ridiculous tweet. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, comment, leave a message. Until next time.